Wealth can purchase silence, but it cannot purchase the certainty that the silence is empty. Callum Mercer learned this the way most truths arrive in a fine dining room, quietly, between the second and third course, while everyone pretended not to notice. It was a Thursday in late October, and the dining room of Vermont sat high above the financial district of Boston, like a jewel box bolted to the side of a glass tower. 31 floors up, the city spread out beneath the windows in a carpet of cold light, and the people who ate there liked it that way. They liked looking down. The restaurant had 2 Michelin stars, a wine list thicker than a hymnal, and a reservation book that turned away senators. For Calla, who was 30 years old and had once been 3 semesters from a doctorate in comparative linguistics, it was simply the place where she made enough in tips to keep her father breathing. Her father, Edmund, was 63 and had a kind of cancer that the doctors discussed in percentages, and the percentages were not good, and the treatments that might nudge those percentages upward were not covered, and so Calla folded napkins into swans and carried plates she could never afford to eat from, and she did it 6 nights a week without letting any of it show on her face. That was the skill. Not the wine knowledge, not the steady hands. The face. She had learned to make her face into a clean, blank room that wealthy people could walk through without ever feeling watched. She was good at being invisible, and the people at Vermont rewarded invisibility with money. The manager that night was a thin, anxious man named Prosper Halloway, who wore his stress like a second suit. He found her at the service station near the kitchen pass, and his voice dropped to the register men use when they are about to ask you to absorb something unpleasant on their behalf. "Table 9, he said. "Sutton Vale. He requested the corner booth. He requested you, actually. Well, he requested the tall one. That's you." Calla felt her stomach contract. Everyone in the front-of-house economy of Boston's upper restaurants knew the name Sutton Vale. He was the grandson of a shipping fortune and the son of a pharmaceutical one, and he had spent his 41 years on this earth proving that a man could inherit everything except a soul. He tipped enormously and cruelly. He once made a sommelier recite a tasting note 3 times and then poured the bottle onto the floor to watch the man's face. The waitstaff of the city traded Sutton Vale stories the way soldiers trade stories about a particular stretch of bad road. "He's with the Thornbury woman tonight," Prosper added, dabbing his forehead with a folded handkerchief. "And his lawyer. Please, Calla, please just give them whatever they want." "Whatever they want?" "Of course," she said. Her face was already the clean blank room. They came in like weather. Sutton Vale moved through the dining room without acknowledging a single person, his cashmere coat handed off to a busboy without a glance, his eyes scanning the space the way an auditor scans a balance sheet for something to seize. Beside him walked Odette Thornbury, all sharp collarbones, and a diamond at her throat the size of a molar, her expression set in the particular boredom of a woman who has been beautiful long enough to find it tedious. Behind them came a soft, heavy man with a wet smile, Bram Castellan, Sutton's personal attorney, who laughed before jokes were finished and watched everyone's hands. They claimed the corner booth without waiting to be seated. Calla approached with the white linen folded over her forearm, her shoulders square, her smile measured to the millimeter. "Good evening, and welcome to Vermont. My name is Calla, and I'll be looking after you tonight. May I begin you with sparkling or still?" Sutton did not look up from his phone. He lifted 2 fingers and rotated them in the air, a small dismissive circle, the gesture you might use to indicate that something should be removed. "Still. No lemon. And send the sommelier. I have no interest in discussing wine with the help." "Right away, sir." She turned and walked to the service alley and stood for a moment with her back against the cool tile and breathed. Just a shift, she told herself. Just one more spoiled man among the hundreds. She had a system for these nights. She thought about Edmund's laugh, the real one, the one from before he got sick, and she let it carry her back out onto the floor. When she returned with the water, the three of them had fallen into conversation, and Callah's hand paused over Odette's glass for the smallest fraction of a second because they were not speaking English. They were not speaking French, which she would have expected from people performing sophistication. They were not speaking Italian or German. They were speaking Sicilian. Not the textbook Italian of opera and menus, but the dense old island dialect of the interior villages, the language with Arabic bones and Greek vowels, and a music that had survived 1,000 years of conquerors. It was the language her mother's mother had spoken. Nonna Rosalia had come from a village in the shadow of Enna, in the dry gold center of Sicily, in 1961, and she had landed in the north end of Boston with 2 suitcases and a vocabulary of fierce, beautiful, unwritten words. She had raised Callah on it, on the proverbs, the lullabies, the way you curse the heat and bless the bread in the same breath. To Callah, that dialect was the smell of tomatoes splitting their skins on a windowsill. It was her grandmother's hands in her hair. It was the most loved she had ever felt, and now it was sliding out of Sutton Vale's mouth like something cold. "Look at the state of her shoes," he said, in fluent, lazily accented Sicilian, not bothering to lower his voice because there was no reason to lower a voice no one could understand. "Worn down at the heel. You can practically smell the rent money she doesn't have. It's almost touching how hard the poor try to stand near money." Odette laughed, a short, glittering, contemptuous sound. "Don't be unkind, Caro," she answered in the same dialect, examining her nails. "She's probably saving for something with a designer logo printed crooked. Let the little sparrow have her dreams. I save my kindness for things that appreciate in value," Sutton said. Bram, the lawyer, swirled his scotch and added his own coin to the pile. "They don't hear us, Sutton. They never do. They carry the plates and they fetch the water, and the lights are on, but nobody's home behind the eyes. It's the great mercy of money. It makes the staff into furniture." Callah finished pouring. Her pulse was a hammer against the inside of her wrists, a furious private drumbeat, but her face stayed exactly as it was, the clean, blank room, the unwatched space. She understood with a cold and total clarity precisely what was happening. These men had skied in Taormina and summered on yachts off Palermo, and somewhere in those gilded vacations they had picked up the dialect of the people who served them their espresso, and they had decided to keep it as a private weapon, a secret blade to slip between the ribs of waiters and maids and drivers, who could never possibly understand. They believed their money and their education had bought them a soundproof room in the middle of a crowded restaurant. They believed she was deaf. She set the pitcher down, looked Sutton Vale directly in the eyes, and gave him a smile so warm and so empty it could have heated an empty house. "I'll send the sommelier right over. Please don't hesitate if there's anything at all you need." She walked away with her spine made of rebar. She was not going to cry, and she was not going to break, and the night was very young. If Sutton Vale wanted to play a game made of secrets, she would be patient, and she would let him keep handing her the rope. The evening thickened, the dining room filled with the soft choreography of money being spent. The gleam of silver domes lifted in unison, the low surf of murmured conversation, the discreet pop of corks worth more than a week of her wages. And at table 9, every time Callah came within reach, Sutton found a new way to perform his cruelty in his borrowed tongue. "Careful, Bram," he said as she set down the first course, a delicate crudo fanned across cold stone. "Don't let her breathe near the fish. Who knows what she rode in on? Look at her hands, chapped like a fisherman's." Honestly, the standards here have collapsed." Odette murmured in Sicilian, lifting her fork and inspecting the tines as though searching for grime. "She looks like she hasn't slept since the Obama administration." Cala's jaw wanted to clench, and she would not let it. She moved through the mechanics of the job. Serve from the left, clear from the right, never let the apron crease. And she carried each insult back into the shadows by the wine room and set it down inside herself like a stone in a pocket. Her grandmother's language, the language of lullabies, was being used as a horsewhip, and the people swinging it had souls like empty vaults. But she said nothing. She waited, and then, as the main courses arrived, the conversation at table 9 turned, and it turned towards something that made the insults look like nothing at all. She was leaning in to pour a Barolo that cost more than her father's monthly oxygen when Sutton dropped his voice and spoke to Bram in the lowest register of the dialect. "The committee's bought and settled," he said, tasting the wine, nodding to himself. "Dr. Aldous signed off on the trial data this morning. I had 40,000 sent to his consulting shell in Liechtenstein last week. The Meridian drug clears the final review board on Monday. We start shipping in the spring." Bram's smile flickered. "And the deaths in the second cohort?" "The liver numbers. Buried," Sutton said, wiping his mouth with the linen. "Aldous reclassified them as unrelated cardiac events. By the time anyone connects the lawsuits to the labels, we'll have moved 300 million in units, and I'll be sitting on a beach. The FDA is a roomful of tired civil servants with mortgages. They want the paperwork to be clean more than they want it to be true." Cala's hand trembled, the smallest betrayal, a tremor in the crimson stream filling the glass. She was no longer overhearing a rich man being vile. She was standing 18 inches from a confession, bribery of a federal reviewer, falsified clinical trial data, a drug with a body count being pushed to market on purpose. He was laying out a federal crime in a crowded room, shielded, he believed, by nothing but the music of a dying island language. "And Odette?" Bram asked, glancing at the woman, who had drifted back to her phone. "Does she know about the trust?" Sutton's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. "She thinks the prenuptial protects her. She doesn't know my lawyers." A small nod toward Bram, who inclined his head like a man accepting a compliment, folded the whole settlement into a foundation I control. The day she bores me, she walks out with the earrings and nothing else. She'll never see it coming. She isn't bright enough to read past the first page. Cala stepped back, lifting the empty bottle, and the sheer casual completeness of his betrayal turned her stomach. He was selling out everyone at that table and beyond it. The patients who would take his poison, the agency meant to protect them, the woman wearing his ring. She walked toward the kitchen, feeling something strange settle over her, a sickness and a clarity braided together. But Sutton was not finished with her. 10 minutes later, plating a side of charred broccolini to bring out, she watched the table through the porthole window of the kitchen door. Sutton was holding something up between two fingers, turning it in the candlelight. A long, dark hair. It had plainly come from Odette, whose extensions spilled over the back of her chair. He laughed and said something rapid and bright in Sicilian to the other two, and Cala, who had read her grandmother's lips across a noisy kitchen 10,000 times, caught every word. "Watch this," he said, laying the long hair with theatrical care directly across the center of his half-eaten dry-aged strip. "I'm bored. Let's have some sport with the sparrow. I'll make a scene, get the entire meal comped, and have her thrown out onto the street tonight. There's nothing quite as entertaining as watching one of them beg." Odette giggled. Bram lifted his glass in a small, ugly toast. The blood went out of Cala's face, and the kitchen seemed to tilt. This was no longer a night to be endured. This man intended to destroy her livelihood for entertainment, the way a child pulls the wings from a fly. And if she lost this job, the math of her life collapsed. No tips meant no treatment, and no treatment meant a number on a chart sliding the wrong way until it reached 0. He was holding her father's life in his manicured fingers, and he didn't even know it. He just wanted to watch something small and tired break because he was bored between courses. She set the plate down. She turned and walked into the manager's cramped office, where Prosper was hunched over the reservation tablet, looking like a man waiting for a verdict. "We have a problem at table 9, she said, and her voice came out eerily level. His head snapped up. "What did you do?" "Calla, I told you. That man's family practically owns this tower. What did you do?" "Nothing," she said, but Sutton Vale just took a hair from his fiancée's head and laid it on his steak. In a minute he's going to call you over, demand the entire bill be comped, and demand that you fire me on the spot. I'm telling you before he does it, so you'll know what it is when it happens." Prosper's colour drained. He stood and paced the 3 steps the office allowed. How could you possibly know that?" "Did he say it?" "In English. I heard him," she said. "It doesn't matter how. Prosper, I'm asking you to back me. Just this once." He looked at the carpet, at the wall, at his own folded hands. "Calla. If Mr. Vale says there was a hair in his food, then there was a hair in his food. We comp it. That's procedure. We don't call a guest like that a liar. And when he tells you to fire me—" A long, cowardly silence. "Take the rest of the week," he said softly. "We'll talk about your position on Monday. I have to protect the restaurant. You know what these people can do. I'm sorry. I really am." And in that little office, with the friars roaring on the other side of the wall, Calla understood the architecture of the world she'd been living in. The rules were not for men like Sutton Vale. The whole machine, the manager, the procedure, the trembling deference, had been built to absorb their cruelty and pass the cost down to people like her. Prosper wasn't evil. He was just afraid, and his fear made him useless, and she was alone. But underneath the fear washing through her, something else was rising, and it was hot and bright and very calm. It was the memory of Rosalia, who had crossed an ocean with 2 suitcases and built a life with raw hands and bowed to no one. Not the landlords, not the priests, not the men who told her where a woman from Enna belonged. Calla did not need Prosper's permission to keep her own dignity. She never had. "Never mind, Prosper," she said quietly. "I'll take care of table 9 myself." Before he could answer, she picked up her tray, squared her shoulders, and pushed back out through the doors into the bright, hushed dining room. Sutton Vale already had his arm in the air, fingers snapping, chest swelling with the breath he was about to spend on his performance. He was waiting for a terrified girl. He had cast her in a role, and he was certain she would play it. Calla reached the table before a single sound could leave his mouth. She stepped squarely into his sightline and set the tray of broccolini down in the center of the table with a soft, final click. Her movements were unhurried and exact. She did not duck her head. She did not offer the frightened, "Please don't smile" he was expecting. She stood entirely upright and let her eyes settle on his with the flat attention of a woman who has stopped being afraid. "Is there a problem with your steak, Mr. Vale?" she asked in English, her voice clear and pitched to carry. It carried far enough that the couple at the next table paused mid-sentence and turned. Sutton's hand dropped, his lip curled, and he jabbed a finger at his plate. "A problem. There is a catastrophe on this plate. Look at it." His voice climbed, theatrical, designed to fill the room. "There is a hair, a long, filthy hair, coiled in the center of my wagyu. This is grotesque. Vermont is supposed to have standards, and instead they let creatures like you put your hands near my food. I want the manager. I want this bill erased, and I want you gone. You're finished." Bram leaned back with a smug, expectant smile. Odette sighed and lifted her phone, distancing herself from the tedium of the lower orders. Calla looked down at the steak. She looked at the long, dark hair. Then she looked, slowly, at the extensions tumbling over Odette's shoulder, and when she spoke, she did not speak in English. "It's a beautiful hair, Sutton," she said, and the dialect came out of her in the rolling, dry gold cadence of the Sicilian interior. Every vowel rounded the way her grandmother had rounded them. "But we both know whose head it came from. I watched you take it off Odette's coat 10 seconds ago and lay it on your meat." The effect detonated. Sutton's sneer fell straight off his face. The blood drained until his skin went the color of old paper, and his mouth opened and produced nothing. Bram's smug smile slid sideways and collapsed. He choked on his scotch and coughed into his napkin. Odette's head came up from her phone, so fast the diamond at her throat swung, her eyebrows climbing toward her hairline. "What?" Sutton breathed, in English now, his voice a thin, cracked thread. "What did you just say to me?" She leaned in, both palms flat on the cool mahogany, and she was not finished. Some part of her had been waiting her whole life to not be finished. "I said you're a liar," she continued in Sicilian, slipping into the harder, older register, the one Rosalia had used who underpaid her, and women who looked through her. "And I said that my shoes may be worn, and my hands may be rough, but I don't have a dead thing rotting where my heart should be. You do. I've been listening to it die all night." Sutton tried to summon his authority, and his voice refused him. He was a man who had never in his life been spoken to like this, and the novelty of it had paralyzed him completely. Calla turned her gaze to Odette, who had gone pale, the dawning horror on her face, the look of a woman realizing that every cruel joke of the evening had landed in fluent ears. But Odette's humiliation was not the prize. There was a far bigger one. "He doesn't love you, Odette," Calla said, switching to clean English so the surrounding tables could drink it in. Then, to drive the blade all the way into Sutton, she switched back to the dialect, for the part meant only to wound him. "He folded your entire settlement into a foundation he controls. The prenuptial is a stage set. The day you bore him, you leave with your earrings and nothing else. He told his lawyer all of it while I poured your Barolo." "He laughed about it," Odette gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She wheeled on Sutton. "Is that true? Sutton, is that true?" Sutton was hyperventilating now, his eyes ricocheting around the room, registering for the first time that the nearby tables had gone silent and were leaning in, an audience to the unraveling. And Calla saved the last cut for him alone, leaning so close her words landed only in his ear, low and even and cold as a stone church in February. "And your little drug," she murmured in Sicilian, $40,000 to a Dr. Aldous in Liechtenstein. The liver deaths in the second cohort reclassified as cardiac events. A poison cleared for sale on Monday by a bought reviewer. "It's an ambitious plan, Sutton. I wonder how the people at the FDA's criminal office will feel about your wire transfers when they read about them." Bram lurched to his feet, his chair shrieking against the floor. "We're leaving," he said, and the lawyer's instinct had finally cut through his panic. He had grasped that they had just confessed to federal felonies in front of a witness who understood every syllable. "Sutton, get up. Now." But Sutton could not move. He sat staring at her, as if she were something risen out of the ground to collect a debt he'd forgotten he owed. "Who?" he managed. "Who are you?" Calla straightened. She reached behind her neck and untied the knot of her apron. "My name is Calla Mercer. My grandmother was Rosalia, from a village under Enna, and she scrubbed floors in the North End for 30 years so that her granddaughter could understand exactly what kind of man you are." She lifted the apron over her head. "And for the record, Sutton, you don't get to fire me. I wouldn't carry a glass of water to a hollow, gutless little coward like you if the alternative was the gutter. Odette did not wait for him. She seized her clutch, picked up her full glass of Barolo, and emptied it directly into Sutton Vale's lap, then turned and walked out, her heels firing against the floor like gunshots. Calla dropped her folded apron onto the table beside the contaminated steak and turned her back on the ruined man in the booth. No one stopped her. Prosper stood frozen by the host stand, his mouth slightly open, watching her go like a man watching a building come down. The October air on the sidewalk 31 floors below was cold enough to feel like a slap, and it was the best thing Calla had ever felt. But she knew the fight was not over. Sutton Vale was a wounded animal with limitless money, and wounded animals with money do not slink away. They hire people to bury you. If she simply went home and waited, he would spend whatever it took to discredit her, to drown her, to make her a liar in the eyes of anyone who mattered. She needed a shield, and she needed to strike first. She sat on a granite bench in the little plaza at the tower's base, her heart still going like a fist on a door, and she took out her phone. She did not call the police. A local precinct could be reached by Vale family money before she finished the sentence. Instead, she searched for the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations, and then she searched for a name she half remembered: Margaret Ofori, the investigative reporter at the Globe who had spent 2 years dismantling a hospital billing fraud and clearly enjoyed it. She wrote Ofori a long, precise email. She set down everything: the name Dr. Aldous, the $40,000 payment, the shell in Liechtenstein, the drug called Meridian, the buried liver deaths in the second cohort, the reclassification, the Monday Review Board. She named Bram Castellan as the attorney present and a direct witness. She noted the date, the time, the restaurant. She read it twice, and she sent it. What followed was not a scandal so much as a controlled demolition. Margaret Ofori did not let the email sit. The specificity of it, names, numbers, a country, a date. Let her pull the public trial registrations, cross-reference the shell companies, and put a reporter's questions in front of Dr. Aldous, who turned out to be a man with a mortgage and no appetite for prison. He folded inside 3 days, confirming the payment, confirming the reclassified deaths. 11 days after the night at Vermont, federal agents walked into the offices of Vale's holding company with a warrant, and Sutton Vale was arrested in the marble lobby of his own building, photographed in handcuffs by a Globe stringer who had been tipped to be there. Wire fraud, bribery of a federal official, conspiracy to defraud the United States. The Meridian approval was frozen, then withdrawn. His father, a glacial man who had always prized the family name above any individual carrying it, convened the board within 48 hours and had his son stripped of his shares, removed from the company, and publicly cut loose to keep the stock from cratering. Odette Thornbury, exactly as Calla had warned her, hired the most merciless divorce attorney in the city and used the public fraud to void the prenuptial on grounds of bad faith, walking away with a settlement carved out before the federal freeze closed over the rest. And Calla, because her email led directly to the unwinding of a falsified drug trial and the prevention of a tainted product reaching patients, she qualified, after 8 months of depositions and waiting that frayed her nerves to threads, for a federal whistleblower award tied to the penalties levied against the company. The number on the check did not feel real when she first saw it. She read it 4 times. It was enough to pay every dollar of Edmund's debt in a single afternoon, enough to put him in the care of the specialist whose name she had only ever said like a prayer, enough to move them both out of the cramped 2-bedroom in Revere and into a small white house with a yard north of the city, where the maples turned the color of fire in October. On a quiet Sunday morning the following spring, Calla sat on that porch with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands and watched her father walk slowly across the grass in the thin gold light, upright, alive. A year past the percentages the doctors had given him. He stopped to feel the sun on his face. She thought about Rosalia, who had left her nothing in a bank and everything in her bones, a handful of proverbs, a few lullabies, a dying island language that no one was supposed to remember, and that had turned out to be the one weapon money could not see coming. Money could buy a great many things. It could buy the steak and the wine and the lawyer and the soundproof little room a man built out of a borrowed tongue. It could not buy the thing Rosalia had given her for free, the thing that had been hers all along, the unshakable knowledge of exactly who she was, and exactly where she came from, and exactly whose granddaughter stood in that dining room and refused to be afraid.